Flight attendants, please take your jump seats.
Hello, and welcome to the first episode of In the Jumpseat, a podcast by QP Local 8125 for our membership and other listeners. My name's Cameron Jones, and I'm your host, as well as the recording secretary for the local. On today's episode, we will be covering a variety of topics, including where we're at now in bargaining, talking about unpaid work won't fly, as well as a variety of other topics. With me here today is President Alia Hussein. How are you doing today, Alia?
Great, Cameron. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us on today's podcast. So do you want to give us a little bit of a background on our collective agreements under the local?
So we currently administrate two collective agreements, one for WestJet Encore and WestJet Mainline. WestJet Encore's collective agreement is going to expire on July 31st of 2026, and WestJet Mainline's collective agreement is going to expire on December 31st of 2025.
We certainly do have a busy year ahead of us, and we've already started preparations in certain areas. Can you give us a bit of an idea as to where we are already in the bargaining process?
Yeah, we do. The bargaining cycle that we are about to enter into is going to impact every single member of Local 8125. With both agreements approaching their end dates so close together, we're entering into a period of really important decision-making and action that will shape the future of all of our work here in 8125.
We are in a unique position when it comes to bargaining two collective agreements simultaneously, but we have been preparing for this. And so can you give us a bit of an update?
So from the WestJet Mainline perspective, the bargaining committee was elected and stood up. They hit the ground running. Within 4 days of them being elected, they did the QP bargaining training. After completion of the bargaining training, we've met basically every single week to review collective agreements, start putting our proposals together, and then more recently we got the survey data, so we've been taking apart the survey data. And in August, we're going to be setting up the Encore Bargaining Committee, so we'll send out some nominations, and then following that we'll do the training for the Encore Bargaining Committee, and then followed by that we'll do the survey as well for that group.
So with WestJet Encore, so we're going to have two bargaining committees running simultaneously?
We will. It's going to be a very busy time for the local. So Encore's collective agreement expires not shortly thereafter, and so it follows a similar timeline that the WestJet Mainline agreement follows. So within the last quarter of their collective agreement expiring, we have to issue notice to bargain, which means when you back that timeline up, when we issue notice to bargain for WestJet Mainline, we will be starting bargaining preparations for WestJet Encore.
It's exciting to hear all the work that's already been put into this. And earlier you were talking about the survey that went out for WestJet Mainline. So can you talk to me a little bit about surveys and what may have come out of the first survey that we had?
So the first survey was a priority survey. It was a little more in depth than what we expect our other surveys to be. Following that survey, we're currently going through it. We will send out additional surveys as we need to drill down to get further, whether it's data, direction, or information from the membership. It's our commitment to ensure that the membership's voice is seen and heard throughout this bargaining process. We want to ensure that the membership understands that bargaining happens with you, not at you.
And a lot of our members have reached out and asked where they're able to submit feedback on the current collective agreement. And it's important for them to understand that these bargaining surveys is where the bargaining committee gets their mandate when they're at negotiations with the company. And that's what they're going to be negotiating. One of the key kind of themes that I think we should expect to see throughout bargaining is the concept of unpaid work won't fly. So are you able to walk us through a little bit about what unpaid work won't fly is and what it means when it comes to this round of negotiations?
So one of the key priorities for this year is ending the practice of unpaid work. I think it's important to understand what is unpaid work in our industry. For flight attendants, unpaid work means a lot of things and sometimes different things to different groups. But for WestJet flight attendants and WestJet Encore flight attendants, it means that we're simply not paid for all hours that we are at work. There are, according to QP National Survey results, over 35 hours a month that a flight attendant on average is at work unpaid. So some examples of unpaid work might be providing guest assistance while on the ground, boarding, deplaning, safety or security checks, and anytime there's a delay and we're on the ground.
And I think, if you don't mind walking us through, there was an event recently in Vancouver that occurred where our flight attendants were required to perform their safety-related duties, but that was unpaid.
So the recent event in Vancouver is another really telling example of where unpaid work is really challenging. The crew performed an evacuation after they arrived at the gate and deplaning had begun.
It's crazy to think that in some of our most critical moments that cabin crew at both WestJet and WestJet Encore aren't being paid, especially when the safety of our guests is paramount and we're performing the duties that we're trained to complete.
You know, Cameron, ending the practice of unpaid work isn't a conversation simply about fairness. It's also a conversation about our values. We should be paid for performing our duties.
I couldn't agree more, Alia. Now, to shift the conversation slightly, we're coming up to the end of the final Sunwing members coming over and joining the WestJet operation. Can you give us a bit of an update as to what's going on that front?
So, as a result of the CIRB decision, what happened is that some of the Sunwing working conditions were paused, and then basically what happened is that we now have two different sets of pay scales, for example, in our environment that we're going to have to reconcile with CA2 coming up with the bargaining cycle. So our commitment to our membership is that what we're going to work on is overall improvements, seeing no losses for anyone. That's the goal of the bargaining committee.
You bring up a key point that I think is important to touch on, and that relates to QP National's bargaining policy. In their bargaining policy, they talk about we are not allowed to accept any concessions. Can you maybe explain what a concession is and why that's part of their policy?
You bet. A concession is when an existing right, benefit, or protection in our collective agreement is reduced, eliminated, or traded away. For example, cuts to wage rates, loss of vacation days, or weaker scheduling protections would all be considered concessions.
I think it's important to note for the membership that bargaining is always going to be a give and take process. But can you maybe advise us as to why our national union has a policy when it comes to bargaining and the importance of having no concessions in a round of bargaining?
For sure, Cameron. QP's policy means that we don't end up bargaining away or giving up something that was a hard-fought win for us in a previous bargaining cycle.
And this policy definitely gives our bargaining committee a clear mandate and protects the long-term progress of our current collective agreement as well as the collective agreements to come. Now, we talked earlier a little bit about the survey, and I think there's obvious bargaining priorities for the membership. A good example of that is wages, for example. Are you able to walk us through a little bit more in detail on some of these priorities and what the members might expect we're going to get?
You know, Cameron, one of the things about bargaining is that there's real risks to doing it in public. And so with the bargaining committee, what we are doing right now is working behind the scenes on the specifics. But I won't be, and I'm not, to be honest, in the position to be sharing this with the podcast at this stage of bargaining. But as we move through the bargaining process, we will definitely share more specific information with the membership, but we have to be strategic. The more information we give at this stage is more at risk for us than it is in benefit to the membership.
That makes perfect sense. And it's really important, I think, for the membership to note how important strategy is throughout the entire negotiations process and why certain information might be shared and certain information might be held a little bit closer to the bargaining committee's chest throughout the entire negotiation cycle. And I think that also highlights the importance of why we might not want to be posting on social media certain bargaining priorities and having those conversations in a public platform.
Ultimately, Cameron, this is about this entire process being a marathon, not a sprint. So the local is committed to sharing information when it's necessary or when it's needed. And we are committed to ensuring that the membership knows that it's their interests and their direction that the bargaining committee will be following. And we will create as many opportunities as possible for the membership to get engaged or to share any questions or concerns that they might have.
Alia, I couldn't agree more. And bargaining, at the end of the day, it's 30% the bargaining committee, and really the strength in bargaining comes from the membership, which makes up the other 70% of the equation. And that's all we have for you on this first episode of the In the Jumpseat podcast. This is only the beginning, and we're bringing you updates every step of the way. Be sure to subscribe, share, and stay informed as we enter this critical bargaining period. Remember, this is our turn, this is our voice, this is our contract, and thanks for joining us in the Jumpseat.
Flight attendants, please take your jump seats.